Hello, and welcome to Music Maps, the Rock and Roll Book Club podcast. In each episode, we use a place as a jumping off point for a conversation about music, anywhere from the obvious to the obscure.
So before we get on with it, I've just got a little bit of housekeeping to do. My name's John Doran, I write about music. It's really nice to be back in Walthamstow. I spent my last night as a Londoner in here interviewing ex-members of The Fall. And it was great. It's so nice to be back. Thanks to Mark from Rock and Roll Book Club. What they do is brilliant. So the main thing that we have to discuss is that usually at this point of a presentation, I'll do like a little spiel reminding mainly middle-aged men that the Q in Q&A stands for question, not long, drunken monologue. Cosey has very kindly offered to answer some questions at the end, but I'm giving you fair warning now, so think of some questions. On that night I just mentioned, the Fall night, I kind of made a joke, but I probably didn't signal that I was joking. And I said, if anyone in here says the words, "This is more of an observation than a question," it'll be the last thing you ever say. And someone stood up, like, I thought he was like literally ready to batter me. But obviously Throbbing Gristle fans are much more civilised people, I think. So
not at the very beginning.
It's a difficult job, I think, to sum up who Cosey is in a couple of sentences, especially when you could do much better by reading her first book, Art, Sex, Music, which was published by Faber in 2017. But I will give it a go. Cosey was born into a working-class family in Hull in 1951 and was turned on to alternative or new ways of living, thinking and creating at the end of the 60s. And she helped focus and create and change the direction of the radical arts and music collective, Coombe Transmissions, and she became a key member during the 70s. After joining in 1969, group's notoriety led to them having to leave Hull in 1973 for London, and arguably the culmination of Coombe was the prostitution show in 1976 at the ICA, which featured artwork assembled from Cosey's work in the field of kind of pornography and kind of stripping and so on. The show also featured the first public performance and the third in total of Throbbing Gristle, or TG, the band which founded industrial music, who remained a cult concern during their initial 7-year run, but have gone on to become seen as incredibly influential, groundbreaking and important. And Cosey moved from London to Norfolk in 1980 to embark on an incredible 4-decade-plus long career as a musician, mainly working with her partner Chris Carter, and also taking part more recently in such collaborations as the fantastic Carter Tutti Void featuring Nick, who's going to be playing music for us later. Cosey remains an artist, musician and author, but we're talking to her tonight about the publication of her second book, Resistors, and in the unlikely event, my God, sorry about that. In the unlikely event that you don't own this book, that I'm too weak to literally lift up, Cosey will be signing, if there's a really new, funky-looking kind of paperback edition, and Cosey will be signing copies of that after a 5-minute break after we've done this. I was going to go straight into the book, but I'm like a really firm believer when it comes to sort of like interviews of like paying attention to kind of chance and fate. And I was doing some research today at the British Library, and the security guard, they always check every book that you take out of there just to check that it's not one of theirs. And he looked at this book and went, Cosey Fanni Tutti, not to be mistaken for the opera. And I thought, well, what a really interesting thing to say, because of all the times I've met you over the years, I've never once asked you what your feeling on that particular opera is.
I don't have any. It was just one of those puns from when I was doing mail art. Another mail artist sent me a postcard, changed my name to that. So that was fine. But I mean, when Art Sex Music came out, I did on Amazon get a load of things for people thinking that it appeared in the music thing as under an opera as well. So that was quite weird, but I understand that. But no, I've never really listened to it. Don't need to, do I?
I'm sort of I'm tempting fate a little bit here, because like the question I'm just about to ask you, I asked this to Marky Smith, and his response was, it's not fucking Oprah, John, just get on with the fucking questions about music. And I just said, look, the reason we didn't get to do this a while ago, because you've been through some kind of problems with your health. Yeah. You look fabulous. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Ups and downs, as they say. But yeah, I'm a bit better, but it's ongoing, yeah. So
can I ask you to explain what the premise of the book is? It is very unique, I think.
I never thought of it like that. It was almost by accident that I came to do the book, and working and meeting Caroline Katz and doing the film with Delia, and at the same time discovering this mystic that lived locally to me, because I was researching Delia. And then as I started reading Marjorie, I just suddenly realised that alongside me there were these three women that just had such a kind of terrible time in their life just to be who they felt they wanted to be. And that's how it came about. And I just, as the information sifted through on Delia, all these connections developed. And I was thinking, well, there's Marjorie coming in here, there's me coming in here with Marjorie, and Delia coming in here with me, and there was this wonderful sort of thing going on, and that's how I started to write about it.
Was there a specific moment when it reached critical mass, though?
In what, when I was writing it?
No, I'm really into Cheese on Toast, The Fall, and Doctor Who, but I'm not going to write a book about these three things. Or maybe I am, actually, I don't know. Yeah. But no, obviously you can have interests in stuff, but was there a specific moment when, like a light bulb moment almost, when you thought this would make a book?
I think there was, as far as, because I spoke to Caroline when we'd gone so far into doing the sound, I was working on the soundtrack with her, so far into that, and I just felt I needed to do more than the soundtrack for Delia. And I said to Caroline, do you mind if I actually write about Delia? Because everything that's come through as we've sort of investigated her life and everything, I just felt that I wanted to write about her in terms of where I stood as an artist and musician as well, because there were so many parallels between us. And she graciously said, absolutely, go for it. And then Margie was just there, and it was actually when I spoke to my editor at the time, Lee Braxton, and we were just talking over lunch, and I was saying that I wanted to do this book with Delia and talk about both our lives in parallel. And I said, I'm thinking of someone else as well. And he just said, I saw a documentary about this woman called Margery Kempe. I went, that's her. And that was the trio. And that was, I think, the light bulb moment when I thought, well, if someone from the outside can see it how I see it, then yeah, it's got legs. And yeah, that's when I started to think seriously about getting some words down on the page. So I don't think I'm giving away any trade secrets, or at least I hope not. But if you go round to yours and Chris's house, there are a lot of Daleks there. Not life-size Daleks, not actual Daleks, but like Dalek toys. There's a cabinet full of them. And I think like Luke Turner, who I run the choirs with, who's here tonight, we both see this as a sign of a superior person, to be honest. I know like Stephen Morris from Joy Division collects them as well. And I think that really suggests to me that just how, I see it as a symbol of just how deeply ingrained the aesthetic of Doctor Who and its sound design is kind of imprinted into the kind of post-war generations. Was your introduction that you were conscious of to the work of the Radiophonic Workshop, was it via Doctor Who? No, not really, because I think I was about 11 or so when I first heard, so I wasn't the tiny child, that was scared by Doctor Who. And by then I'd also been watching a lot of cartoons that had weird music as well. And I reckon Delia had a hand in those, the Radiophonic Workshop had a hand in those. And of course with my dad doing building radios and things, I was used to these weird noises coming through the house. So when I hear him on TV with these cartoons and then in Doctor Who, it was like I didn't really hear it in the same way other children did, because I'd already accepted it as music, really. So then as I carried on and got into Coombe and everything, I didn't even have a record player for a long time, couldn't afford it because I was thrown out of home. And then it was only when I met Chris, and he had Radiophonic Workshop albums and things like that. So then I started like appreciating it more, because so much has gone on in my life. I don't have time to sort of think, I wonder if I should look into so-and-so. You know, I just like 1 hour, 1/2 a day, one day after another was just full up, you know. So that was my real introduction to their work.
Do you think there's like a comparison to be made between your music, and specifically I think kind of TG in its kind of first incarnation, and the Radiophonic Workshop, in as much as you get the sense that a lot of the equipment was kind of like jerry-rigged or partially salvaged, or you were using stuff for things other than their purpose?
Yeah, I think that's what attracted me most of all, was that they had to make do with what they had. And I've always had to do that, because the money's not just been there to buy something that's ready-made to do what I might want to do. And actually, when in retrospect thinking, I would even want that anyway, because someone else has done it, and why would I want to get a sound that someone else has already made? That doesn't appeal to me at all. And that was the thing that was in common with me and Delia as well, is that she wanted to, you know, make sounds that she hadn't heard before, and other people hadn't made either. And that was the greatest thing, really, when I looked into her music and her process and how they worked things out. And they used test equipment to make sounds. Old test equipment they used to sort of on old BBC gear, and they just used it to make sounds that whatever they could then manipulate on tape or whatever.
How long is it since you recorded the Coolicon single?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. It's got to be a while, hasn't it? I don't know, but Chris even remembers. Do you remember? 10 years, there
10
you go.
Years. Was that the kind of first overt reference to Delia and the Radiophonic Workshop in your work?
Yeah, it was.
So obviously you kind of already knew quite a bit about Delia. I'm wondering, what were the kind of really interesting things that you dug up in the specific research for both the soundtrack and the book?
I think what it was with Delia, it wasn't just her music with me. I wanted to know Delia, the personal side of Delia, what made her tick, what made her want to do music like that, and what drove her to just carry on and then leave the BBC, not stop doing music, which a lot of people seem to think, but she carried on doing music, writing music all the time. She always had a paper and a pencil with her, writing music. And that's what fascinated me about her. She was really driven, and she wouldn't like put up with being at the BBC, having to do things in a specific way and not getting credit for it, obviously, either. So having to leave and carry on in her own way.
There's an amazing bit of detail in the book, and I really love this bit of you describing you playing piano as an 11-year-old, accompanied by the sound of your mother at the Burroughs adding machine, which is incredible. I mean, I'm guess like you obviously wrote that knowing that, think of this as like in some way like a precursor of like an industrial process. For anyone who doesn't know, well, do you want to explain what the Burroughs adding machine is, first of all?
William Burroughs' father's company. So the Burroughs adding machine basically gave him the wealth to carry on how he was. I'd always been fascinated by cash machines and things, even as a kid. I made my own out of a bit of cardboard with a sponge behind it and little buttons to press, stuff like that. And so when I saw this second-hand Burroughs machine, and like with industrial, we were sort of like putting out, you know, his album, I thought, God, it's a Burroughs. After all that time, and I get to play with this Burroughs adding machine, you know. But my mum had one already, so she was a wages clerk for the factory, and she'd bring it home and work on the dining room table, doing all the wages, and I'd be just like, more or less, not even a slight. I'd be here with the piano, and she'd be on the table here, and I'd be doing my practice pieces and messing about.
Did you ever tell William Burroughs about this?
No, I wasn't allowed to meet him.
Really? My God.
Yeah, that was a stay-at-home movement.
So I feel like I was a Doctor Who obsessive when I was a kid, and I used to get the comic, and like I was a real spod, and I think I knew quite a lot about Delia Derbyshire to begin with, not the more adult stuff about her kind of relationship with alcohol and stuff like that, which funnily enough they didn't go on about in Doctor Who Weekly. But Margery Kempe, on the other hand, was like I knew next to nothing about her. Now the interesting thing about Margery Kemp is there's been a lot written about her, but I'm taking it there's really only one source of original material. Is that right?
Yeah, there's only one copy of her book at the moment in the British Library. There's thought to be two, but the other one's not been found. Well, they were just handwritten by scribes. And then dissolution of the monasteries came along, and then all these books were sort of either destroyed or kept. Thankfully, someone rescued hers. Carthusian monks actually rescued hers because they believed in what she was practicing, which was effective piety, which was very outrageous kind of worship of God and Jesus and everything. With her wailing, she used to wail really loud and throw herself on the floor almost like hysterically. But the Carthusian monks were well into that, and also into women who were mystics. So they saw the value of her book and they stowed it away, and the people that they stowed it away with happened to be related to the people where it was actually found.
So obviously Margery Kempe, like just the difference in society, it makes it harder, I would guess, to kind of identify directly with Margery Kempe. And I think you hinted at this earlier. Do you identify as agnostic or atheist, or do you have a specific way of thinking about yourself and organised religion?
I'm an atheist. I don't believe in organised religion at all.
So was there any kind of bar to you identifying with someone who is almost at the opposite end of the kind of spectrum when it comes to faith?
Yeah, I found that difficult at first, but then I took it, I thought of Marjorie as this was her project almost. This was her process of being herself, trying to find herself outside of what she was expected to be in that situation in the 14th century, which was just a wife and a mother, and fixed into religion, and every single level, her sex life, everything was dominated by religion. So I took that as her fight against that. That was her transgression, to do what she was doing. She found that that was the way to get out of her situation in King's Lynn. She could go, say she'd had a mystical conversation with Christ, and she had told her to go to Jerusalem and all these other places, and Rome and everyone, pilgrimage. And of course, some of the monks backed her, some didn't. But she was just determined, and incredible, because she went when she was about 40 years old. She took off to Jerusalem, cart, horse, dodgy ship, foot, 6,000-mile trip over the Alps and back again, That's a phenomenal achievement for someone that, like people said, she was a mad woman. But you can't organise something like that if you're mad. So and that's why I got into Marjorie. That's how I got into her, thinking how she was a person that wanted out of her situation. She'd already rebelled a bit. She dressed in things she shouldn't have dressed in, basically. She wore, it's really not nitpicking, but it was interesting to me to find out what she wasn't allowed to wear, like gold braid. Only the church people were allowed to wear gold, And she only had like tiny gold braid on her dress, but she was a heretic for that.
You must have imagined what a night out on the tiles with the three of you would have been like.
Yeah. I think I'd have got on with Delia because we had something in common. Marjorie, I think I would have had to try and find something where we connected, because she was just so, I think she could probably recite the Bible from beginning to end by what I've discovered about her. But I think I would find some common ground with her, actually. Maybe get her drunk with Delia and me, maybe something like that would work.
Call Marjorie an Uber, it looks like she's about to start wailing again. What, if it was a Netflix series, I'd watch it, I think it'd be pretty good, actually. Yeah. You've said you would read a section of the book that actually deals with you three.
That's good, thanks. So it's because there is so much information about Delia and Marjorie that nobody would know, and because I didn't want to just focus on Delia or Marjorie and themselves, there are moments in the book where we do sort of coalesce, so I'll read a small bit. And this is about us not staying in our place that we're prescribed to stay in. I was once described I once described the activities of innovative, radical individuals and groups of people as pockets of resistance, similar to the butterfly effect. Their new thinking, unorthodox actions and ideas somehow filter through all the noise of the bustling world at large. As if by magic, there's a space for the echoes of these others to slip through like infiltrators, undermining norms, revealing and inspiring new fields to explore. Their echoes can take many forms and consequently evoke different responses. A sound, an image, an event, a criticism, a personal trauma can be loaded with murmurings of unfinished business, that there's more to be done, more to discover. I think of them as contributory and determining factors, integral parts of my recordings. The murmurings from the past rise to the surface above the quagmire of anonymity and superficiality, the mundane, seasoned, tired experiences, and take on a new meaning and invigorating purpose. This is what the sirens of wartime did for Delia, becoming the inspiration for much of her audio palette, a welcome shift in instinctive response. Little fragments of the world making themselves heard in peculiar and particular ways, as abstract sounds, as music, as opposed to charging the body with a sense of fear. The abstract sounds that influenced me as a child were benign compared to Delia's. They were the wailings, bleeps and whooshes from the radios my father built by hand. Familiar sounds in our home, so that when I was 12 and first heard Delia's music on the TV and radio, what had once been weird and non-musical had become music to me, innovatively formed into tunes. Such audio curiosities of my childhood via Delia and my father turned out to be a fundamental element in my musical output. I see myself, Delia and Marjorie, as pockets of resistance. Despite often being targets for derision, striving for and actively seeking the as yet undiscovered, to try and find a solution to the restless, unquantifiable passion and emotional expression we call creativity. I'm not alone in my notion that people who feel other play a part in society as a means of achieving their goal to be themselves. Natalie Leisure describes it perfectly in her book Sweet for Barbara Loden as putting on an act in order to break free. I've lost count of the times I was told as a child to stop acting out or acting up. In other words, get back within the right parameters and down from your high horse. How dare you assert yourself by trying to step outside and be more than you're supposed to be. I've certainly had to operate within my societal place. At times I've used it to my advantage, finding ways around the rules to gain access to what I need. The struggles that happen along the way to uncertain places can be exhilarating as well as enlightening, whether for better or worse. Unmapped territory is my place of choice. From a young age, I had a sense that there was more out there, that I wouldn't and couldn't accept or conform to what seemed to be agreeable enough for everyone else. I still feel the same. It's who I am, and I've never given much thought to trying to find out why being this way is important to me. That's never been as important as following my intuition, maintaining my inner spirit. That's as spiritual as I get these days. I used to be interested in the mystical and magical, even religion. It was all new to me in my youth, and I researched belief systems, looking for a place that felt mine rather than the place I was expected to take. But none of them ever felt right. I pushed it all away as irrelevant. The unconventional was always more appealing for me, as it was for Delia. This is from what Delia said. I've never wanted to be on the inside of the music world. I've always wanted to be on the fringe. We both sought and fought and found some degree of refuge and affirmation by at times being part of like-minded groups which advocated autonomy, freedom, and an unconventional creative approach to life. It's good to be among people who share your sense of otherness, who struggle to fit in and be the person they never were. We can fall apart trying to play a part within a society that views you as alien, a threat to be ignored or silenced, at the very worst, eradicated. Being other in a collective of others helps. It gives you the freedom to be who you are and helps relieve the sense of remoteness, of difference. It eases the everyday pressure of handling prejudices and provides reassurance that we're not crazy, but just people with a different view and expectation of what life is about and our active role within it. Living on the radical fringe can be amazingly thrilling and at times a nightmare. The reaction to so-called radical behaviour is a curiously love-hate, negative-positive thing. By stepping out of line and meeting with disapproval and contempt, you're faced with attempts to break your spirit, so you're consequently in a permanent state of repairing and reinforcing your defences to ensure any precious new discoveries of self can't be violated. Whenever I've hit resistance, as did Delia and Marjorie, whether in the form of criticism, being reviled and maligned, or attempts to hold me down in my so-called place. I've harnessed the surge of energy from the anger I've felt and used it to fuel my resolve. Sadly, life in a collective can also have challenges that necessitate the same defensive approach, as I found out way back when I was part of the Coomart Collective.
So one of the clear differences, I guess, between Marjorie and Delia is one of, like, approach, and I don't want to make a value judgment about any of them. They're so far apart in so many different ways that it would be impossible to. But to generalise quite crassly, it feels like Marjorie ran headlong any problem that was in her way, whereas Delia kind of turned the other cheek, but was very much she had intellectual solutions to the problems she was facing in society at the time. I don't want to be absolutist about it, but did you see more of yourself in one over the other?
I did in some ways, yeah. I mean, what Marjorie did, and you're right, she did go headlong. She just refused to behave herself, absolutely. And what she was doing was, she was at risk, and she was tried for heresy, and the punishment for that was to be burnt at the stake. But that, I mean, and it was, the trials were like, I think they were about 5, and it didn't put her off, you know. And I think that's the difference, is that in the 14th century, what do you do? Do you carry on with that and then just risk being whipped, burnt at the stake, or whatever else they want to do to you? Because the punishments were horrendous. There were like breast strippers and things like that going on for women. They were sexualised punishments for stepping out of line. And you have to realise, if you read the book, the difference for Marjorie then compared to me and Delia, even me and Delia, it was quite different, was that she was in a situation where the church and the king ruled the world, and that was it. And you did what you were told, and the men told you what you could and could not do. It was full-on misogyny. And not only they told you what to do, if you, like with Marjorie, wanted to travel, she had to have it in writing that she had permission from her husband to even move around the country. And then on top of that, she had to have written permission from bishops to do other things that she wanted to go to, pilgrimages. So it was incredibly brave of her, and yeah, I saw more between me and Delia. It was easy to see because we're both in the music business as well, so you know I could understand what she was up against. But Marjorie was something else. I don't know, would anyone here risk being burned at the stake? Just, you know, I don't think I could do that.
So, like, misogyny becomes a clear theme in the book. Would you say more so than, like, the first book, maybe?
Possibly, yeah. Maybe I just didn't focus on it in the art, sex, music.
When you were writing art, sex, music, I got the impression that you were trying to draw a line under a stage in your life and maybe shift to a different gear, but would it be fair to say that it's had the absolute opposite effect, right, in that book? It seems to have made you busier than ever.
Yeah, I thought that if I actually wrote my autobiography, that I could sort of like write. I even say in this book, I thought I'd just put it to one side, and that would be right. That's whatever many chapters of my life done with. Right, I'll carry on now, because there was so much to put right. It got to a stage in my life where I thought, my life has been rewritten for me by so many people, and I just got really sick of it. And that was one of the reasons that I wrote it. And I wanted it down in writing. You know, at that point, I didn't know what was going to happen to me. You know, with my heart trouble and stuff like that, I thought, God, I should do this because I could be gone tomorrow, you know. Anybody could. You could get run over by a bus or whatever. But for me, it was important for me to get that down. And then, yeah, all hell let loose, basically.
I mean, and I know your kind of perspective on the music industry, as you've just clearly said, is from the fringes rather than from the centre, but still you have got to look at this stuff over like a long period of time, and like I was thinking about Radiophonic Workshop in how attitudes towards women have changed over the years in the music industry. And I think I'd allowed myself, which is obviously quite a privileged male way of looking at it, I'd allowed myself to think, well, Delia Derbyshire's name is now on the credits at the end of Doctor Who. But I read this book and said, oh, actually, how much has stuff changed? You know, so when you were looking at the Radiophonic Workshop, and is it a microcosm, and does it give you an insight to how much work there's still left to be done or anything like that?
How much work with for who?
I mean, well, I guess,
What, as far as
I guess,
misogyny in the music business, you mean?
yeah.
Yeah, a hell of a lot of work to be done. Just in society, I think. It's not just the music business.
Do you feel that Delia Derbyshire is recognised enough or properly or respectfully enough within the kind of context of the BBC?
I think it's getting there, but because she's not here to speak herself about what she's done, I think men are speaking on her behalf. So it's quite strange. That's why Caroline's film was so amazing, you know. We got to work, you know, two women working on a film about Delia. It was just wonderful. I did interview the people that she worked with and her partner of the last 20 years of her life, which was wonderful. You got to know what she was like outside. And one of the guys that worked with her in the studio said to me, it was incredibly misogynistic in the Radiophonic Workshop. He said it was horrible, and it was horrible for Delia to cope with, you know, it was difficult. So I thought that kind of told you everything, really, for someone to say that.
So in another really amazing bit in the book, you kind of touch on the idea of like the kind of sounds from your childhood, you know, like before you fall in love with pop music, it's the actual sounds of your environment, which really, they're the kind of triggers for, you know, looking back and things like that. You talk about her adult practice being influenced by things such as aerial bombardment and air raid sirens. I was wondering what the influential sounds of your childhood are, like a pre-pop music. What was the soundtrack, the organic soundtrack to your childhood?
I think, like I said, it was just my dad working on these radios and tweaking them all the time. And he rigged up, I think I mentioned it in Art Sex Music, he rigged up radios around the house so that it weren't just in the living room, they were in the kitchen and the dining room. And he'd speak through them. It's like, way back then, he'd sort of be freaking out because he'd have the radio and then all of a sudden my dad's voice would come on the radio and the next music will be for, and I think, what the hell? You know, so those kind of like playing with equipment and music and things like that, I think that had a huge effect on me. Because he was, when I think about it, he was really into all that. And he had one of those sofas where the bottom lifted up and you could put store in. I think it was probably a sofa bed, but he didn't realise. And it was just full of electronic magazines, a bit like our house is with Chris. And it's just like, they say you marry your father, don't they? I just thought. But it was just full of his magazines of building kits and everything.
I get the impression, like reading about like Daphne Oram and Delia Derbyshire, that they were like, clearly just totally different people. They were different. They were different class for starters, weren't they? Yeah. You know, they had a different life experience. Like Delia, obviously, was a lifelong bohemian. There's some talk about trauma in the book. Clearly, you know, she developed alcoholism. Did you get any closer to thinking about what her primary motivation as an artist was? Obviously, it's something difficult to put your finger on because she was quite a private person in a lot of ways.
I don't really. She listened to the radio all the time, and she was just fascinated with it and music in general. And she was just, because she was a fantastic musician. I mean, she was like concert pianist by the age of 8 to 11. You know, she was doing stuff like that. And so I think what it was with her is because the radio was there, she thought that was her way into doing music, and that she could actually make music of her own at a certain point in her life. I'm just guessing here, by the way, but I'm just thinking that must have occurred to her. Going by her exercise books that I researched and at the John Rylands, just reading all that, I cannot believe that at her age she'd be between 11 and 14 in her physics book, not her music book, in her physics book, talking about all these different things and ways of using the mouth to make sounds and fantastic things like that she was doing. And this was all research outside school because they weren't interested in what she wanted to look into. They just did like the basics, but then she went outside and researched it all herself. So it started very early on, her interest in music.
How old was she when she went to see the electronic poem? I mean, like the expo. I mean, that's exposure to like what, Varese, like the Le Corbusier, right? Yeah. She was quite young, right?
Well, she'd just finished university. She'd just finished her degree, and that was 1958. So she was born in 37. So what would that be? Someone do the math for me. She must have been 2021, wasn't she, or something like that? 37 to 58. Anyway, that's when she went 1958. That must have been incredible. Absolutely incredible. And Daphne had been there as well, funnily enough, but they hadn't met at that point. But yeah, and from Stockhausen was there. All those people, all the right people were around. And she ended up working with most of them. She worked with Stockhausen.
I'm going to hand it over to you fine people for questions in a few minutes, so be thinking about them. But before we do that, I just wanted to say, well, I should ask you the really obvious question. Will there be a third book?
There's got to be another album before another book.
Ace. And something, I'm being self-indulgent by asking this, but I just really want to know about it. To what extent do you see the idea of kind of practicing art and practicing magic as one and the same thing?
I don't practice magic.
Do you think or make art in a magical manner?
Like Chris said, he said, you're more cosmic. Your name was Cosmosis before it was Cosey. Yeah, I mean, I think, like Delia and Brian Hodgson, who worked with it, actually said that magic does happen. And it happens when you're doing music, and you don't know how, and you don't know why. But there are those kind of magical moments. And for me, it's more about intuition. It's like just surrendering to the moment when you're doing music and just allowing things to come through and find their place. And you're kind of like just a conduit, really, for this. But it's intuition, because I don't write music. I was taught how to do it for the piano, and thankfully I forgot. So it's all done by intuition.
And just one more, actually. So do you have a way of disrupting, or any tried and tested methods for disrupting your usual artistic practices, whatever your equivalent to the oblique strategy card would be, or anything like that?
I think it's usually removing some tracks, the ones that are getting on my nerves at the time, and I can't get them out of my head. They're in the way of whatever else I want to move on to. So don't delete them, just mute them, and then listen to what's left and see if it's going to go anywhere, and then maybe bring in the tracks slowly, or not at all ever again. That's all I do. I'll just go out for a while, come back, have a day off. That's pretty good. But it's frustrating when you reach that point where you kind of think, I know it's there, there's just 5% more, and it's there, and it won't come, you know. It's like when you're writing a book, isn't it? When you just, I know what I want to say, but the words just won't get. So I usually go away. I did do overtone chanting when I was doing this book, yeah. When I was getting stressed out about Marjorie and her religion, because I was thinking, I don't even believe in God, and why did you do this, you know? I'm thinking, how do I explain about this woman who I think is absolutely fantastic when I don't believe in what she believed in? But I believed in her. That's what it was all about. So I'd go and do overtone chanting and just completely relax myself, because it has this wonderful thing of, it's almost like your chakras. It's like massaging your insides, really.
I believe there's a couple of mics out in the audience, so if you put your hands up, and we'll try and get round as many people as we can. The person at the back with a hand up, please. Just give us a second till you get the mic.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Cosey what she thinks of today's electronic music, whether she thinks that it has been well informed by what Throbbing Gristle and other bands have been doing, and whether it's good or bad. I mean, do you think it's been worth it, in a sense, to affect the music of today, or whether you feel it might have atrophied? I don't know, but I'd like to hear her view.
I think there's good and bad electronic music, to be honest. And there's some music that's obviously influenced by us, and by Chris and Cosey. Sometimes we listen to music and we can hear the sequences that we've done in some of our tracks, things like that. But I don't think it's bad. I mean, it's a continuum, you know. Just go on and see what happens next. Hopefully something really fantastic.
Hi, I just want to start by kind of keeping the female lens, really. First of all, you're wicked. Thanks for doing what you do. Amazing. I also want to acknowledge that the women of Iran and Afghanistan are kind of really connected to what's going on with Marjorie, and they experience that right now, and there's artists and performance artists who are being killed and persecuted for their art, which really, I didn't think of that till you spoke. You talked about radical fringe, which was really interesting. It made me think of, I kind of, in a contemporary way, I understand what a radical fringe looks like now. It could be performance festivals, it could be kind of underground scene, but I wondered kind of what that looked like for Delia, because, you know, women were going through a tough time. It was a different time in our, you know, in our contemporary life. And was there an underground scene that she felt she could be at one with, like we can now in our festival scene, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, she actually attended the first feminist rally, so she was aware of all that, absolutely. And she had friends on the Fringe as such, and so her work outside the BBC was more in that group of people, and it was that work that she did that she felt the most fulfilled from. And particularly working with women.
Hi, I really enjoyed both this and I really enjoyed this and art, sex, music, and I'm just curious, what was the difference between writing about yourself and writing about Delia and Marjorie, and which did you prefer?
I didn't have a preference for either, really, but what it is when you're writing about yourself, you kind of know what you've done, for sure. But with Delia and Marjorie, of course, all you got was her book, so you had to kind of like, well, first of all, put it in some kind of chronological order, because it wasn't ordered at all. It was nuts. That's what drove me mad into the overtone chanting, actually. With writing about Delia and Marjorie, I wanted to know as much as I possibly could about them and respect who they were, and that's where it gets difficult, because you want to make sure that you don't, you know, undermine what they did or insult their memory in any way. That was why I did so much research, even into medieval times as well, so that I had an idea of what Marjorie had to put up with, and particularly locally. Because I could see, I mean, I'd just go to King's Lynn, I knew exactly where she lived. I knew that there was a ducking school just nearby her that only market towns could have, you know. And so she'd be well aware that could be waiting for her, you know, if somebody said anything about her getting ducked. And that was the worst bit about it. They used to duck them into sewage as well, the women. So it was that was fascinating for me, discovering exactly what Marjorie had to live with and within, and then no wonder she rebelled to get out, and she was able to. She was lucky though, she was kind of middle class, so that helped a lot.
Hi, Cosey. I got a question about parenthood. You continued with Chris making fantastic records when you had a kid, and I guess I'm slightly asking for tips, really. How do you keep your creative brain alive and keep working in creative world and the business side of things when you've got a small child who's running around being a lunatic?
I don't know, he just fell in with, I mean, we just shared the life together with him. It was never something that was an obstacle at all. He just arrived, and he sat in well with us, and we did the recording when he was in bed, obviously, quietly, or during the day, sometimes if his grandmother had him as well. But he came on tour with us, and he was just there. He was part of the family. But he never affected our creative output at all in that respect. No. But it's finding, I know it's difficult, but it's finding the time. Because with a kid, you have to read the emotional and the physical thing that's going on with them, and it's exhausting sometimes. Not just physically keeping up with them, but the emotional thing as well, is because they're going out. It's a roller coaster for them, you know, when they're frustrated about not being able to do something, not being able to communicate and so on. But it never occurred to me that he would affect that in any way. Because I think when he was 6 months, I went back to doing stripping. So Chris was like looking after him, and then I would get back, bathe him, then I'd be out again for the evening, doing the evening shift stripping. And weekends were full-on family. But it just seemed to slot into place, and we just shared it. I think that's what it was. And when he got older and we moved to Norfolk, well, older, he was 2.5 when we moved there. When it came to mixing the album, I'd take him off to Thetford Forest and we'd collect stuff there. So Chris had the day in the studio, or take him to the beach or something. It was just like ways round it. It didn't seem to didn't affect us in any way somehow. It's weird that. Now you've asked me, why didn't it? I don't know.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. I wanted to ask, do you feel that you could integrate Marjorie's wailing into your music, and she could have been a potential musical collaborator?
Yeah, I think she would be great. Maybe I should summon her up at a séance or something, get her back. Or get someone to wail for me. That would be good. I'm sure there's people out there that do it.
Before we end, I forgot to say thank you so much to this evening's DJs, Golden Atoms, which is Dean and Nick Void, and they've done a spectacular job. And I think Cosey's going to have a quick break, and then she's going to sign books. If you form an orderly queue, no one needs to wail or start crying their eyes out. I think she'll get round to doing all of them. It's been an absolute pleasure to come back to Walthamstow this evening. Let's give it up for Cosey.